Thanks for listening to this podcast of Trending with Timmerie. If you haven't already subscribed, please catch us wherever you love to listen to your podcast, from the Relevant Radio app to Apple, YouTube, you name it, we are there. And if you listen on Apple Podcasts, please be sure to go and give us a 5-star review to help other people discover the podcast. Anything you share in terms of episodes, whether it's texting it to a friend, posting on social media, helps to build up the kingdom for God, to help confront the challenging issues we face as a culture, but with joy, with hope, and with an eternal perspective where our faith collides with everyday life, bringing eternal principles to help us live our life joyfully.
So, what's trending? Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio.
It's so good to be with you. I'm going to talk today about how to get pregnant. Believe it or not, it's a question I actually receive quite often. And I think it's interesting in a culture where there are so many people who would like to get married and have children, to those who are married and struggling to conceive children in their 20s, 30s, 40s. What can be done? Joining me in just a moment will be Dr. Susan Caldwell to answer this question that should seem simple: how to get pregnant, pizza and beer, you name it. Well, we'll give some concrete everything advice, from guidance and understanding when you can get pregnant, supplements, things that might get in the way of becoming pregnant, sperm health as well, gentlemen, you're involved too, to timeline and when to seek after help from a doctor. I'm also going to unpack Shia LaBeouf's story in his own words here on Trending. I watched an incredible interview with Bishop Robert Barron and actor Shia LaBeouf, childhood actor for me, watching shows such as Even Stevens, movies such as Holes, and then all of the adult films he's also done as well. But news broke yesterday that Shia LaBeouf has had a massive conversion into Catholicism, and I pulled parts of the interview to just share with you the depth of this incredible conversion. A young man for years who we saw running into things, doing funny things, and making people laugh as he got hurt on television, to today truly suffering and bleeding the transformation of his story. It's an incredible story, and I can't wait to share some of it with you. Joining me now here on Trending is Dr. Susan Caldwell. She's a NAPRO physician who specializes in addressing fertility, infertility, and underlying health women's issues to help in many ways achieve pregnancy and overall health for women. And to answer the question today, Dr. Caldwell, we're going to unpack the topic of how to get pregnant. Where do we begin?
Hey, Timmerie. So happy to finally be back with you. This is a great question. I love it. Okay, so just to frame this, we have to think of conceiving as, this magical combination of 3 factors coming together, 3 basic factors: a good egg from the woman, ovulated, and wonderful mucus, and healthy sperm. So the mucus is important because the sperm and egg will never meet if there's not good mucus secreted by the woman's cervix, which is in the lower part of her womb. So those are the 3 big things that kind of have to come together for a woman to conceive and for a couple to conceive. And so we will unpack those things today.
Excellent. Now, again, take out your notes, save this podcast. It'll be available later on wherever you catch your podcast, relevantradio.com. We're there as well, because these are details that are helpful. I remember when I was married and we knew there were some big roadblocks to having children. And these are all the steps that I first started to be walked through in order to know, okay, what will help in achieving pregnancy given just so many interruptions today, from food to underlying health issues to the damage of having, for some people, use birth control or other medications impacting fertility. So let's talk about the egg, the mucus, and the sperm to know how to make it all happen.
Yes. Okay. First, we have to recognize that ovulation is a good thing, right? So the women are here from the time they're, become fertile in puberty. They hear, here's the pill. It's going to, help your acne. It's going to help your mood. It's going to be the thing that kind of makes you feel great all the time. Okay, that's a lie. So we have to appreciate that we cannot ovulate on birth control. So we have to not only get rid of any birth control or disrupt anything that's going to disrupt ovulation, but we need to start paying attention. Women need to turn toward their bodies and ask this question: how am I ovulating? And women only ovulate once a month, and that egg only lives 12 to 24 hours. So it's really important for a woman to be aware of that every month. And there's lots of different apps, although apps we can't really trust in terms of them telling you when you're ovulating, but they can kind of give you an idea, a guide of maybe how to look for ovulation. And with that, we'll get to the cervix and the cervical mucus in a minute to talk about that. But women, I recommend they start charting, find a teacher, find a system, and pay attention to ovulation. The next thing we'll talk about is just a woman's health underlying that. So in order for a woman to ovulate properly, there's got to be a foundation of health there. She's got to be really taking care of the basic needs of her body. If not, then her reproductive system will necessarily kind of be shut down in order that her resources, her energy would be conserved for her other expenditures. So I'm sure you've heard that, girls who are on the track team or competitive swimming in high school, they often lose their periods. Mm-hmm. This kind of speaks to that. So what her body's doing, very, very intelligent system, our bodies, right? So our body's saying, wait a second, we don't have enough energy to create another person inside the body. So what we're going to do is just kind of get rid of ovulation so we can conserve our energy to keep our brain and our heart, kidneys and lungs and all that going. So really speaking to that though, how can women tell whether or not they're healthy? It's tough these days because we know that 88% of adults are somewhere on the spectrum of insulin resistance, prediabetes, or diabetes. 88%. Wow. It is amazing. And insulin is a reproductive toxin. So if there's too much insulin, in other words, if a woman is eating food, or we'll get to this, sleep is so important too, poor sleep, these things can raise our stress hormone levels, raise our insulin hormone level, and that can be a signal to our ovaries to not ovulate because we're not healthy enough. And yeah, and it's amazing. And then sleep, when we're not getting enough sleep, we have high spikes in cortisol, which can also be a signal to the brain that there's way too much stress going on. Don't ovulate.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what you're saying is diet and sleep play a big role in a society that is so focused on productivity. And I think especially as women, if you enter into those work years, or maybe you're trying to balance family and work, you just keep going like an energizer bunny until you absolutely implode. Yes. And the reality is that we need at least 8 hours of sleep, and we need to eat far better than we are. We're not taking good care of ourselves. And I know, for example, myself, I need really, ideally, most seasons I need about 9 hours of sleep. Like I need it. I can't go below 8. And I think sometimes we don't know our bodies. I know I really can't eat sugar. I feel terrible, and that can be a problem and a cause for stress with fertility. And so knowing these things beforehand can be a game changer for so many women. How would you recommend to start cleaning the diet up, and how to start making good habits with sleep?
Wow. That is really, so that's such a good question. So number one, I mean, this is a whole podcast on its own, but we got to get rid of processed foods, right? So colas, diet colas as well, things that are very processed, like, the Oreos and the baked goods and the fast food restaurants and those things. We really need to eat real food and lots of water. So that's tough because often, we like to run on caffeine and alcohol and sugar and, all the junk food. But when a woman's body is preparing to to create another human being, it needs to be in top form, almost like an Olympic athlete, who's preparing for their Olympic competition. We have to think of ourselves as that needy, right? That in need of good nutrition, sleep, and care.
Right. And I'm going to recommend some cookbooks because I know for me, I had to relearn how to cook. I found out I had all these food allergies. I had a histamine issue at one point. I had thyroid issues, polycystic ovarian syndrome. And my mind in each diagnosis was like exploding, going, okay, well, now how do I learn how to cook? Now how do I learn how to cook? I can't eat all these different things. And so I'm going to share some cookbooks on social media. So keep an eye out for that over the next day. I'll be sure to get it up over the weekend. But can you speak to how, briefly, I know we've talked a lot about this, Dr. Caldwell, how gluten and dairy also play a big role in causing inflammation, sometimes preventing fertility as well.
As much as I hate to admit it, they do. I love gluten, I love dairy, and I love sugar. So I am the first one to just have grief around all of this, right? But it is an objective truth that these three types of foods are inflammatory. That means they cause abnormal blood flow, cytokine production, leaky gut, swelling in different areas. I mean, it's just, they're really for many people, and there's a spectrum. Some people aren't as bothered, but I would say if you're a woman, especially a woman who is having trouble getting pregnant, or they know, you've been told something's wrong with your blood sugar, or you're struggling with weight, and you have other maybe signs of metabolic disease, man, that would be those three things, just to dial them down, just to acknowledge where you are in terms of your intake of these things, just to admit it, just to say, okay, what I have trouble here, and then have a plan to dial back and get rid of the things that maybe cheese. I mean, things like that. People love cheese. It's so sad. But cheese isn't always good for, dairy is great for baby cows, but maybe not for humans.
I love when people say that. I think it triggers many individuals.
Yes,
it gives us a
true.
crash course on diet. Again, I'll post some links on social media, as well as a post on social media some of my favorite cookbooks, autoimmune paleo cookbooks, maybe thyroid reset cookbooks that are all really helpful and fun, and it makes it easy with meal plans and all of that. And I'll post a link on how to sleep better. We've done some great episodes on how to do that, so I'll share some of those podcasts. Dr. Caldwell, how does thyroid and what are the roles of vitamins in this whole process of figuring out how on earth can I get pregnant?
So thyroid is crucial. Thyroid kind of runs our motor in terms of all of these functions that our body's trying to perform every day. Everything from our thinking to our metabolism, even to our sleep, and especially ovulation. So I think every young woman really needs to know at least her TSH, which is the main thyroid hormone that the brain makes in response to what the thyroid gland itself secretes. So it would be great for everybody. I think OBs pretty much do that on wellness exams. And if the thyroid TSH hormone is above 2.5, you might need to have a conversation with your doctor asking to help you to get that TSH less than 2.5. We now know that women, especially ovulating women, have different metabolic requirements than, say, a 50-year-old man would have. So I will, when I'm looking at labs, if a man's thyroid is 3.5, I'm not going to blink an eye, especially if he is thriving and feeling great. But if a woman who's a reproductive age has a TSH of 3.5, the alarm bells are going off in my head. And this was not the case until I started taking care of women who were trying to conceive. So thyroid's really important. But again, good thyroid function also depends on things like vitamins, like vitamin D. Another one is iron. The vast majority of women that I see of reproductive age are very low in iron. They are critically low in this test called ferritin, which is the measure of the total body storage form of iron. So make sure you're taking iron. Make sure you're taking vitamin D. Vitamin D, maybe just 2,000 units a day. And a good prenatal vitamin, I would recommend one that instead of folic acid has something called methylfolate in it, like the word, in the ingredients list, instead of folic acid, which is not the optimal form of folic acid. Actually, folate is the optimal form of that. So a methylated prenatal vitamin, vitamin D, and iron are absolutely a must. And then whatever else your doctor tests, and some people B12 is an issue. And with thyroid, again, D is important, iron is important, selenium, zinc is important if you have thyroid issues. Yeah.
And all of these are so helpful too, because if you check it, make sure you're on a good track before you get pregnant, and then you're able to achieve pregnancy and you have that baby cooking, pregnancy can have its challenges and exhaustion. You want to make sure you're at optimal levels with all of these vitamins as well to make pregnancy easier. If you're deficient in iron, that can be really exhausting for you. Vitamin D, there are so many things that can go really kind of pulling from mom's energy source while she's cooking that baby as well. So here is our crash course on how to get pregnant. Believe it or not, it's a question I receive quite often. And so this is a podcast to share with a friend, kind of share an archive for later when someone asks later on. That's been Dr. Susan Caldwell here on Trending with Timmerie. You can find her at drsusancaldwell.com. That's drsusancaldwell.com. I'll post a link on social media as well as in the podcast notes. Also, shout out, I'll be in the Twin Cities area on September 15th for Relevant Radio's annual Christ Brings Hope banquet. If you're in the area, I invite you to join me at the JW Marriott at the Mall of America for the evening. To register, go to relevantradio.com and click the events tab for Minnesota. Tickets are going fast. I really hope to see you there, so be sure to get your ticket today. I'm looking forward to meeting you in person. I'll be right back here on Trending with Dr. Susan Caldwell talking about how on earth to get pregnant, from vitamins, thyroid, all of these pieces we've been discussing so far. But next we're going to talk about sperm health, timeline, and when to seek help from a doctor and what type of doctor to contact, because that matters too. I'll be right back here on Trending.
Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
I listened to the full interview of actor Shia LaBeouf's conversion story of becoming Catholic. It is incredible. I'm going to share parts of it with you today in his own words. You can listen to some of the incredible stories, so stay with me because I am so excited to hear this childhood actor who we saw on TV and things such as Even Stevens, Holes, the many movies he's done as an adult, have this profound conversion after absolutely hitting rock bottom and being in a true place of despair. Joining me now, though, is Dr. Susan Caldwell. She's a NAPRO physician specializing in fertility, infertility, and treating women's underlying health issues. You can find her at drsusancaldwell.com. We'll post a link on the podcast notes as well as on social media. Just follow me at Timmerie, Timmerie, where we've also tagged her. Dr. Caldwell is here to help us answer the question that I receive all of the time. It's a question I think would be very simple, but with the impact of environment, food, health issues, it's not so easy. And the question is this: Timmerie, how do I get pregnant? How can I get pregnant? And so to unpack that with us today has been Dr. Susan Caldwell. We talked about egg and ovulation, the importance of certain types of vitamins, thyroid, sleep, diet, a lot of the basics that you'd be surprised how influential they are on fertility, ovulation, and again, that even potential to have a child. Now we're going to unpack sperm health because, gentlemen, you matter too, so this isn't just for women. We'll talk about timeline and when it's time to seek help from a doctor and what type of doctor that should be. Dr. Caldwell, how much does sperm health matter in the whole grand scheme of achieving pregnancy? I know when I first went to a NAPRO specialist like yourself, one of the first things they gave me was a handout. One side it was on good egg quality, the other side was on sperm health. And my poor husband, you go home and you share this with your husband. I think every man's like, wait, what's wrong with my sperm? But the truth of the matter is that sperm health matters. Can you share with us a little bit about that?
It really does matter. So I've learned that sperm sperm, we're in a crisis of sperm health in our in our culture today. Sperm counts have been declining over time. And one of the main reasons for this, especially in younger men, even younger men under 40, and what I understand to be probably more at the root of this is something I mentioned earlier about our metabolic health. Again, 88% of adults are somewhere on the spectrum of insulin resistance, prediabetes, diabetes, and most of us don't know it. And so this is critically important. As I said before with women, when we're not optimally healthy, our reproductive system is going to be downregulated so that we can preserve our energy and resources to just function, to survive. Right. And so reproduction is a function of a thriving human being, not just a surviving human being. So we are seeing this crisis of health in men of reproductive age. So we really need to remind our guys that they too need to cut back on the junk food, to get their sleep, take their vitamins. Now, what you mentioned earlier, when you go to the doctor, I'll be honest, when I see a couple who's trying to conceive, all of my attention is going to be on the woman, right? Because by far, she's got the more complex system, by far, than the man. So, but the men aren't off the hook, right? So, if there has been a 6 months to a year delay in pregnancy, it is a good idea for a man to have a semen analysis, to check the sperm and just make sure the morphology is okay, the count is okay. And just, I see occasionally there are men with no sperm that had no idea they had no sperm. And that's devastating when you see that, but that does need to be diagnosed, and that person does need to get to a specialist for that. But there are many, many supplements for men, especially for things like morphology. So vitamin C is really great. Alpha lipoic acid is good. Something called pycnogenol is a supplement that's great for sperm health. But men have to eat real food. They have to get real sleep. They have to exercise, but not too much. So we definitely want to encourage them to not, just focus, all their attention on, it must be my wife's issue, because many times it does involve the husband's health. So they need the attention too.
I'm so glad you brought this up because, again, like you said, it's usually solely focused on women. And to help with these small things, diet, exercise, vitamins, and it's all about quality, right? Quality sperm. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the challenge with the decrease in male health and the decrease in the quantity of sperm today. It's something to pay attention to. That's Dr. Susan Caldwell here on Trending, answering the question, how do I get pregnant? Let's talk about timeline and knowing what's adequate, what's inadequate. I know some friends of mine, they'll get pregnant, and when they're not pregnant in 2 months, they're like sitting here nervous and shaky and stressed out. And then others, it takes a few years. The timing can be different for many people. What is realistic, and how should we be looking at the timeline in our month-to-month experiences as women?
Well, in a perfect world, of course, which we're not in, a woman would start to track and understand her signs of ovulation, even in her teen years, so that by the time she's trying to conceive, she would kind of be an expert in knowing her body, and would have had conversations with women who are very knowledgeable, like maybe her mom or her doctor, who would confirm, yes, that's kind of normal. Yes, it's normal to see that mucus. Yes, it's, and so that's already been kind of looked at. But many of our women today haven't had that. So like me, I took the pill for 10 years. I got off the pill and I really thought I would just magically get pregnant. Like it was a switch that was flipped. And I see this really almost every day in clinic where women do believe, they've put this really, I hate to say it, but they've been given a poison that they've ingested for 10 years. And then it takes time to heal from that. So as soon as a woman can just start to really pay attention. So I would say, if a woman had been on the pill, I would definitely say a year of trying, and not getting pregnant, then she really needs to seek help, but to start charting ASAP. Ideally with a formal system that is taught by an instructor and not something that she just kind of figures out online on an app on her own, because it just doesn't give her the education that way. And then remember that even a healthy couple, 100%, both sides of the couple are 100% healthy. It could take a healthy couple 4 months who have normal fertility, 4 months to achieve a pregnancy. So that's really why we tell people to, if you think everything is really looking good, don't seek help until 6 months. In other words, if you've been charting with with something like the Creighton model and you're not pregnant in 6 months, we have a problem, right? Because we know that healthy couples achieve in about 4 months. So if you've gone 6 months and you've been timing intercourse, you know you have mucus, you know the sperm can get to the egg, and you've got the timing, locked down, and you're using those days of fertility, and you're not getting pregnant, I say at 6 months, it's time to get some hormones tested for sure, if you're charting with Creighton or something like that.
Okay, and I'm posting a link on social media to infertility specialists, that is NAPRO physicians in particular, so that you can find one and you can find a Creighton model charting system, a fertility care practitioner to work with you. That's what we did. We started with seeing the physician, started charting, started taking the data of charting to our physician, and even with that guidance, because you meet with this fertility specialist, whether in person or via video. I mean, they're able to look at your cycle and they're able to say, hey, what's going on here? And is this a repeat thing I'm seeing every month where ovulation might not be occurring, or it's being delayed because, it seems like there's maybe some stress here, or it could be over exercise or lack of sleep. There's so much information to gather about the body that is an indicator of what is happening. And I think that time frame is refreshing, Dr. Caldwell, to see kind of based on the circumstances, whether having been on birth control or not having been on birth control, what is reasonable to start looking for help.
Yeah.
Can you talk to the importance of seeking out a NAPRO physician and the difference between, what some might argue is just a fertility specialist and a NAPRO physician?
Yeah. So again, I receive these women every day that have gone from birth control, got off birth control, went to the OB, got some advice from the OB, went to the fertility clinic. So I hear this story day in and day out. So I'm very familiar. So what typically happens is a woman will go to the OB, and the OB will really reassure them, often unfoundedly, and they'll say, "Oh, don't need to worry about it until it's a year," without really asking questions about what's going on with her body, the woman's body. So that's why I ask, I'd say to women, get out there and get charting, so that, because you're going to know more about your body than the OB. And then occasionally you'll have an OB who will say, okay, well, let's just give you some Clomid, or let's just give you some letrozole, or in other words, let's give you something to boost ovulation, without ever checking in with the woman's body to see what is going on and what might be the problem. And this is not really a great idea. And the reason why is because most of the problem, honestly, in getting pregnant is going to be with the second half of the cycle, called the luteal phase, where progesterone is made or not made. That progesterone is key in helping that lining prepare, get healthy for implantation. So if we don't pay attention to that luteal phase and the progesterone in the luteal phase by testing it and by treating any deficiencies, which the OBs, by the way, don't really know how to do that, because that's really been done through the protocols for that testing and treatment really come from the NAPRO research. Most OBs have no idea how to test that. So what'll happen is they'll give Clomid or letrozole, or even at the fertility clinics, they'll quickly they'll do a cursory evaluation sometimes, and then give these really strong doses of medicines to make the woman ovulate, but they're not paying attention to the hormones in the luteal phase and the quality of that lining. So many of these women, they get pregnant, but they don't stay pregnant. They have so many miscarriages because the entire chart is not being looked at. The entire cycle is not being looked at. And so it comes down to a philosophy problem, right? OBs are taught how to suppress or manipulate the cycle. They are not taught how to to ask the woman, to ask her body, what's going on? What help do you need? Right. And so by using an APRO doctor and charting, the woman is able to turn to her body and ask, hey, what's going on? What's right? What's wrong? What do you need help with? As opposed to just getting on a conveyor belt of sorts and going through whatever treatment is prescribed at this particular clinic without any recourse to what the woman's body is needing.
And each is different. That's what I love about our NAPRO physicians. You go in and you look at the whole person, from stress, anxiety, relational situations, to what's actually happening with the medical data, and you treat her. You don't give her birth control. You don't give her, some things that are just kind of a blanket attempt at helping. And you spoke also to the high rate of miscarriages for so many women. This is a part of that journey and that question of how do I get pregnant? And I'm a testament to this. I would not still be pregnant with either one of my children now if it weren't for monitoring progesterone levels with a NAPRO physician. I am in the lowest zone of progesterone. I have been, I know you guys look at 3 different zones of progesterone. Yeah. I've been in the lowest zone the entire time with this pregnancy and and if I didn't take progesterone, there were moments where you're starting to see signs. You can see this in the data of miscarriage. And this is the incredible science of NAPRO physicians and how you were called to do what you do to help women in achieving pregnancy and keeping those babies right where they are. Dr. Caldwell, I'm so thankful for everything that you do. If you would like more information on these topics of women's health, fertility, check out her awesome blog, drsusancaldwell.com. It's drsusancaldwell.com. Post a link on social media in the podcast note. She's tagged on Instagram, and she talks about everything from detoxing from contraception, if that's where you've been, why you don't need it. And I highly recommend this. I had a woman just reach out to me a few weeks ago. Her daughter wanted to go on contraception, leaving for college, and she was trying to figure out, how do I talk my daughter out of it? And it's been the episodes with Dr. Susan Caldwell and others where we've been able to, give that as a resource to the mom, and for the mom to listen with her college-age daughter and to hear real evidence-based science and medicine to make real healthy choices for our bodies as women now as well as in the future. So check her out, drsusancaldwell.com. Again, links are on social media. I'll be right back here on Trending, and I'm going to talk about the incredible conversion of the actor Shia LaBeouf to Catholicism.
We're talking about what you're thinking about. You're listening to Trending with Timmery on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
There are a lot of stories that bring me to tears and just awe me when I hear them. But yesterday was released the conversion story of actor Shia LaBeouf, his becoming Catholic. It's an exciting moment, I think, in the history sometimes of not just the culture, but also the church, to hear the stories of people such as Shia LaBeouf having this conversion, this very public conversion. Actor Shia LaBeouf, I know him from my childhood as a millennial from the show Even Stevens on the Disney Channel, where we would laugh our hearts out to the funny and silly things he would do to hurt himself and get himself in trouble. And he said at one point when he was asked by a priest, what are you good at, when he's trying to figure out his purpose in life? And he said, oh, well, I'm good at getting hurt and entertaining people with kind of that running into stuff. And he realized at a certain point, he said that basically, Padre Pio, who you may know is a major part of his conversion. He was asked to play the role of Padre Pio in an upcoming film, which trailers still aren't even out yet. I think it's going to be a phenomenal story. And Shia LaBeouf plays a young Padre Pio, but what he realized was this parallel between his own life of playing Padre Pio and seeing the story of Padre Pio, and how Padre Pio literally, he had the stigmata. His hands, his body bled from the suffering, the wounds of Jesus Christ. And he realized that I too have kind of suffered for people to enjoy, entertainment. And Shia LaBeouf's story of salvation is an incredible story. We'll see him in the upcoming Padre Pio film as news breaks on that. But what happened is Shia LaBeouf over the last couple of years as he had this possibility of revamping his career. He saw this film as the opportunity to put himself back into the Hollywood scene. He was at rock bottom. You may have followed the stories. An absolute mess, vulgarity. He was accused of terrible things by an ex-girlfriend, everything from abuse to intentionally giving her an STD, all of which was never officially confirmed publicly. But what Shia LaBeouf did admit to was that he has hurt many people, and very many people in his life. At the point of getting involved in this Padre Pio film, his mother wasn't even talking to him. He couldn't get his talent agent, anyone in Hollywood to call him back. And so when this opportunity arose, he was at absolute rock bottom. And he decided to start studying how to play this role of Padre Pio. He ended up going up to San Lorenzo in California to the Capuchins, and he basically ended up starting with living in the parking lot there at the Capuchin Seminary. And as in the words of Shia LaBeouf, I'd like to play with you much of his interview and conversation with Bishop Robert Barron. He says that Padre Pio saved his life. Listen to this.
You recognize rightly that this is more than a role, that this is, Pio's interesting, because Pio also saved my life. I mean, it's not just like a movie or something like that, but, and I don't mean that lightly. If you like immersive experiences and you get tasked with playing Pio, your life is going to change.
Well, I see that, for sure. That happened to you.
Yeah.
So here is the beginning of his story, part of the interview. What ends up happening is we see that Shia LaBeouf actually ends up sharing that one of the most profound elements of his conversion was that he had to learn how to celebrate the Latin Mass. Now, you may have remembered last year here on Trending, I broke the story that Shia LaBeouf was going to the traditional Latin Mass. No one knew about it. It was very private. And I shared I had an inside scoop because I had friends who were associated with a parish with where he was at. And we knew through association from someone else, the priest who was the pastor there. And one day, Shia LaBeouf's there at daily Mass. You probably remember me sharing this with you last year. And he shows up after Mass and comes up to the priest and asks him, saying, "Hey, I'm playing this role of Padre Pio, and I would like you to, help walk me through celebrating the Latin Mass." Well, it ends up being that by going to the Latin Mass, learning the ins and outs of the Latin Mass to imitate the celebration of the Mass for the sake of the movie and playing Padre Pio, that this had a deep, deep activation within him with this conversion. Listen to his words here.
Latin Mass affects me deeply. And,
How come?
Because it feels like they're not selling me a car. And when I go to some Mass with the guitars and stuff, and I'm from, Santa Ynez, right? So that's where I was catechized. And there's a lot of guitar playing. And there's a lot of what feels like they're trying to sell me on an idea. Yeah. Whereas what I feel when I went to Oakland and went to and by the way, there's a very incredible version of that as well. That's super activating and very emotional that I've experienced up there with Father Bobby. There's also, and Father Peter, but there's also this, something that happened, Christ the King in Oakland does a Latin Mass every day of the week. And it feels like it's not being done to sell me on anything. Mm-hmm. And it feels almost like I'm being let in on something very special. And the quiet, it activates something in me where it feels like I found something. It's a little bit like a band. Mm-hmm. When a band is pushed on you, it doesn't feel the same way as you finding it. When you find it, then you root for it. It feels like this special thing that you found and you protect it and you hold it and it's yours. When somebody's selling me on something, it somehow takes it kills my aptitude for it and my suspension of disbelief and my yearnings to root for it.
I get it.
There's an immediate rebellion in me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I appreciate Shia LaBeouf's experience of the Latin Mass and how he speaks profoundly to the impact the traditional Latin Mass has on the individual. I've seen this firsthand, and I know there's a lot of controversy over the lack of access to the traditional Latin Mass. I've shared it before. My husband, my family, and I, we do go to the traditional Latin Mass as often as we are able. And there's a difference in the Mass. And I think there is something special spoken to this conversion that Shia LaBeouf has had that many young people in droves are sharing. I have had countless people I've met in the younger generation, some of whom have said they felt as if their inheritance of their Catholic faith has been robbed from them as they suddenly discover the richness in the old tradition of the Latin Mass. And I think it speaks volumes to hear someone such as Shia LaBeouf, who shared he wasn't an atheist, but he was agnostic, and we'll get to that in just a moment, that this experience of the Mass brought about a great love for him. It activated something within him, and that love of our Lord Jesus Christ, the reverence for the Eucharist, I think is something that we need to each fall back in love with again. Going to the Mass and discovering the mystery yet again. There's one point in the interview where Shia LaBeouf mentions that when he goes to Mass, it's like receiving a secret. That's how he feels. And I thought that was very profound because the Mass is a mystery. Jesus Christ's sacrifice for us is a mystery. And Shia LaBeouf is understanding that he's receiving the greatest secret, the greatest mystery, the greatest love any human being could experience. He shares a little bit about his faith journey. His mother was culturally Jewish, not a practicing Jew. He really had no exposure to religion. He never read the Bible up until when he was there, basically living with the Capuchins, and he was living in his truck in the parking lot and spending time there, showering there. But he says that at one point he was never an atheist. Listen to this.
I was never an atheist. I was always an agnostic, even when I was a Sam Harris TED Talk, Christopher Hitchens guy, which is who I was before I fell in. I always had a belief, but I never had like a connection. Latin Mass gave me something where I felt connected, which took me out of belief into connection. Belief kept me, I had belief because that's the rational, logical. It's not logical or rational to be atheist. If you really go deep enough, you get to the Big Bang and then you're screwed again. You have to account for it somehow, which puts you in a belief situation.
Right.
But too much of that logic and too much of that rationale takes me out of feeling, which takes me out of connection.
It's interesting because Shia LaBeouf will walk through how he's had this profound experience of a feeling walking through, especially going to Mass and the feeling of Mass. And I think that's profound to speak to the mystery of the Mass, that the Mass is not rational, but he also dives into how he's read so much over the last couple years in preparation for the Padre Pio role. And then since then, diving into everything from St. Augustine's Confession, St. Thomas Aquinas, all of these rational thinkers, stories of conversion that I think speak so proficiently into the reality and the mystery of our faith. At the same time, the rationality, but again, the mystery that faith is not just something we can fully rationally understand. And he shares that he was trying to rationalize through everything. He shares that he loved picking apart Catholicism. He loved picking on Catholics before. But I want to dive into a little bit more of his story, where he was at when he first entered into this Padre Pio, the potential for this Padre Pio role, and just how he shares he was really at rock bottom. Listen to this.
For a person who felt totally depraved when I walked in. I walked into this, my life was on fire. I was walking out of hell. It wasn't like I willingly came in here on a white horse singing show tunes. I came in here on fire, and I didn't want to be an actor anymore, and my life was a mess, complete mess, and I had hurt a lot of people, and I felt deep shame, deep guilt. I didn't like to go outside much. I really, I had a yearning not be here anymore. I was on my way out.
Is that where you were when you accepted the role of Padre Pio?
So this is why when you spoke about the role, I wanted to kind of dive in there because it's kind of formative to how this all happened to me. I was willing, because pain made me willing to go about this in a different way than I had previously. My opinion about God before this happened, before the pain struck, before my world had crumbled, was art, love, and God, they all mean the same thing. They're synonymous. And as an artist who creates art, I found myself in a godly position often, right? Where I was in charge. And I had also been told my whole life, your life is your life. You have to make with it what you can, You got to be a good guy, and then you got to get married, and then you got to get a house, and you got to get a job and do good at your job, and your life is your life, and things will work out if you put effort in, and it's up to you. And I always really felt that, and it made it hard to believe in God. because it felt like my managerial skills are what are going to amount to a fulfilled existence.
Yeah.
When all of my designs failed, when all of my plans went out the window, when my life had led to serious infliction of pain and damage on other people, I threw up my hands like, my plans are garbage and I don't want to be here anymore, and that was required to enter PO.
One of the neat things I saw on this Shia LaBeouf interview, which, by the way, that's actor Shia LaBeouf, speaking of his conversion to Catholicism, I told you a year ago it was going to happen. I share with you inside scoop where he was going to Mass, where I knew people who were attending Mass. And he talks in the interview about how when he heard the stories of people such as St. Augustine, when he was talking to the priests and the brothers, when he was basically living with the Capuchins for months, that he saw that he had a permission to be a sinner. He saw the stories of others. He also began to see in the midst of his suffering, in the midst of being at absolute rock bottom, that suffering is actually a gift. And it's interesting to hear at one point, I mean, he talks about how depressed he was. He talks about how he didn't even want to go outside. He didn't want to be here anymore. At one point in the interview, he says, I had the gun. And he was literally suicidal, and St. Padre Pio was interceding in his life. God was calling him to him. And I think this is what stands out so much to me about the Shia LaBeouf story, is that this isn't something that Shia LaBeouf did. This was God beckoning Shia LaBeouf toward him. I want to talk a little bit about how Shia LaBeouf viewed God prior to this exposure with the Capuchins and then diving into reading the Bible for the first time. Listen to this where he talks about Christ and how he used to think that Christ was soft and sort of like a Buddhist.
My opinion of Christ at this point felt almost like I was reading about a Buddhist, like this very soft, fragile, all loving, all listening, but no ferocity, no romance.
Then you hadn't read the gospel.
I hadn't read the gospel.
At that point.
I just had this art that I had seen of like this very soft.
More feminized Jesus.
Yes. And so I hadn't had this idea of like the Old Testament Christ on a horse, cape, dipped in blood, sword. I had none of that was in my lexicon of knowledge. So all I knew about was this very soft, meek Jesus, which didn't fit into my idea of what masculinity would be. I come from my dad was a Mongol biker, it's like it wasn't appealing to me. And then I read about John the Baptist and it became quite appealing. The grizzle.
Yeah, right.
And then you get further into the gospel and you start getting into like elements of this like redemptive. It felt like I started reading about a route. I started like reading a map, towards something that felt like let go. That's really what I got out of the Gospels. If I could wrap it up in 2 words, it was let go. And at that time when I was reading it, I was holding on so tight to a life that I was slipping away through my hands, to 35 years of management, that the gospel gave me this invite to just let go.
We're going to skip through just a little bit here, seeing how Shia LaBeouf shares he went from seeing that Christ is masculine, that he saw stories of John the Baptist as he's reading the gospel for the first time. And he said it's like reading a map, and he's seen let go. He talks about how he saw suffering was a gift, and he shares, I didn't want to do this anymore prior to this. This is where I was coming from. He said, I had the gun, that I was there. I was at this point of despair. But then he shares about the warmth and the community that he experiences, people who draw him and catechizing him, from the Capuchin priests and brothers to a religious sister he talks about who would meet with him every day and catechize him. Listen to where he talks about falling into this group of people who absolutely loved and laughed with him and didn't expect anything from him.
And I started falling into this group, and I'm living there. So I'm taking showers in there, and I'm eating with them, and we're hanging out. And
they're drawing you into the Christian, the Catholic thing. They're kind of drawing you into the gospel, into a certain way of life. But more
than that, it's not even like they're drawing me into like laughter. They're like sharing jokes with me. It's like we're just like hanging out. And at this time, I had no friends in my life.
Here, Shia LaBeouf's talking about living with the Capuchins. It starts with just driving up the Capuchin seminary there in California and living out of his truck, watching the brothers go back and forth, to suddenly living there with them. And I want to give you this one little piece where he talks about, he said here, they're not asking anything of me. He was experiencing real, true, raw friendship. He was experiencing laughter. He was experiencing the joy of God after all of the brokenness he had experienced. Listen here where he speaks about prayer.
I don't know nothing about prayer. because I can't cultivate an unforgiving. I don't know anything about silence. I don't know anything about quiet. I don't know anything about it. I got a cell phone in my phone that will give me everything my ego needs. It's buzzing all the time. I got all this, there is no silence, or I don't know anything about meditation. Meditation at this point in my life feels like a self-imposed timeout. Prayer feels like I'm memorizing somebody else's words, like I'm an actor, like I'm doing monologues for myself in my head. And Alex says, just go into that chapel and just shut up.
Where the Blessed Sacrament is.
Yes, and just sit there. Just sit there and be quiet.
So here, Shia LaBeouf shares about his first experience of prayer, that he walks into that chapel and it changed his life, sitting before our Lord Jesus Christ, seeing him in the sacrament. I asked the question, are we allowing our Lord to transform us too? That if God can bring people such as Shia LaBeouf from the depths of despair and where he was at, to the joy of the gospel and the good news, to this conversion union with him, he can do it with us too. Cradle Catholic, convert, wherever you might be, not Catholic. But we need to enter into the silence of Christ. We need to sit before Christ. We need to experience and discover authentic friendship, authentic familiarity. And we only do that by entering into the mystery of Christ, and especially through Mass, as we saw after Shia LaBeouf's story. He was transformed by the grace of God. Have you joined us yet for our weekly happy hour on trending? This is Timmery from Trending with Timmery. Mondays, we discuss everything from happiness, although it's fleeting, to joy, which is rooted in God. We address midlife crises, prayer, friendship, job satisfaction, and you name it, because who doesn't want to have lasting happiness, joy rooted in God? Join me daily at 6 p.m. Central on Relevant Radio or the Relevant Radio app.